What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. In today's video, we are back with another episode of Lions Latest, going to the latest Detroit Lions news because we have a lot of it. There's a lot of news happening at this point in the offseason, man. The season just ended and there's so much going on, and with all the coaching moves left and right, it's actually a great thing. I think we should be grateful for this. Like, obviously, we don't want to see some of these coaches leave, but it means the Lions are doing something right, that we're not talking about firing. Instead, we're talking about losing guys to other teams that are getting promotions and getting opportunities. That's the goal, I think, for Dan Campbell since he stepped in here, is that he was given that opportunity from Sean Payton. Sean Payton helped him kind of get to the next level, and I think he's always wanted to repay that with his assistant coaches. I think he's even talked about that in the past before. So I think from Dan Campbell's perspective, as much as it stinks to lose these guys, right? Because a lot of these guys have been here for multiple seasons. We know them as fans from training camp, right? That's why it hurt me when we lost Aaron Glenn so much, because he just felt like such a core of who the Lions are. The Hard Knocks episodes, man. He was just that piece. Him and Deuce Staley going back and forth. So it stinks to have this news, but it is a positive because the Lions are doing something right. And they're helping these guys get opportunities, which is fantastic because that's what it's about, man. Getting these opportunities to get to the next step, to learn, to grow. And it's fantastic that the Lions are kind of the outlet for that. It's an amazing spot to be in. And it also opens up opportunities for the next guy to go prove themselves, especially if it's in-house. Maybe it's out-of-house, but if it's in-house, to say, okay, I learned what I learned, now let me get my shot at it. I think it's a really awesome process, and I'm glad that the Lions are in this spot again and not firing people. That being said, do need to start there first because most recently, Randle is also set to join the Chicago Bears with Ben Johnson as their wide receivers coach, but now also is adding the label of assistant head coach. So with the Lions, he was just the wide receiver coach. Now he is being named the assistant head coach. And the Lions already had Scotty Montgomery with the label of assistant head coach, which again was kind of helping in, I think, for that potential next opportunity that he could get, whether that's here or elsewhere. Randle just was the spirit of that receiver room. And that was always the room that when you go to training camp, it was the easiest to see because they did all of their individual workouts right in front of you. The energy, the passion, going to miss just as a fan alone, the way that he was so active in like those drills and he participated. He put the big pads on his arms. Like, it was fantastic. And to lose that guy after seeing what this receiving room has become. It's been a lot of continuity, right? Jameson Williams, of course, just had his best season of his career. Over 1,000 yards receiving, improved so much as a route runner. This guy became the answer on the outside. Straight up, against man coverage, single high coverage. It was in the past we could struggle with that. Chicago, Baltimore. But this year it was like when we needed someone to go win, it was him. Indianapolis on the road. It's a heavy cover 3 team. And we're just like, okay, the answer is Jameson Williams. So he absolutely added that element. Got to give Randle some credit for that. Became a much more diverse route tree, even just speaking of Jameson Williams. But as a whole, this receiving unit this season had a real strong case to say that it was the best receiving unit in the NFL against man coverage. All the advanced statistics would essentially back up that that's the case, which is crazy because just a few years ago, that's where the Lions struggled the most, was against teams that could live in a man coverage and play it well across the board. We would dice up zone coverage, but certain man coverage teams that could just lean into that, it could become a problem. It could be, if there was something that really could throw us off, it would become that. But the Lions this past season, that was the complete opposite. They were fantastic if you try to throw man coverage at them. So again, Randle deserves a lot of credit for that. You also have the aspect that they just didn't drop passes. Now, unfortunately, again, that kind of showed up in the playoffs, like with the first drop by Tim Patrick. But on the season, the regular season, and this was by a margin, the Detroit Lions had 4 drop passes between the receivers, according to Pro Football Focus. Now, again, if that's a pass breakup, it doesn't count as a drop. Just keep that in mind. Or if it's something that's maybe deemed that it's not catchable, that won't count as a drop. But it was by a margin that the Lions had 4 drops as a receiver unit. As a whole, I'm just talking about the wide receivers. As a whole, it was a little bit higher with tight ends, but it was so low this season. We just didn't drop passes, and that was one of the biggest strengths of the Lions, is that they didn't beat themselves in that sense this year. I mean, they had a gap between them and second place. I don't know where the Lions are going to go with this. My guess would be they go out of house, right? They hire another guy that they know as a receiving coach that has that background. But I don't want to completely count out Seth Ryan, okay? I'm not saying it's the most likely thing to happen, but I don't want to count out Seth Ryan. He played receiver kind of at Clemson a very little bit, but mainly he's been here since this staff has taken over in 2021. And Seth Ryan was a guy that was also pointed out by Ben Johnson at one point this season for being involved with JT Barrett as, okay, coming up with these trick plays, the creative ideas. I would just say Seth Ryan has constantly been in the mix. He's been brought up multiple times for different ways that he's helped this Lions offense. So just don't count out Seth Ryan potentially surprising and becoming the actual wide receivers coach. My guess would be that he doesn't, but I don't want to count that out. I think it's absolutely on the table as of now. And this is just a side note, like this conversation I think is something that could be much deeper that we can dig into. But for me, with Dan Campbell selecting coaches, DoseOfDion brought this up to me, and it got me thinking, because I also said this on Bleacher Report earlier today. I talked about my wish list for coordinators that we bring in. So if you want to see that episode, it's up there and it's live now. But he was talking about how, you know, some of these best teams, they lose their coordinators, but then you think about how some of the best teams that have created these dynasties have an Andy Reid who maintains the offense. So even though offensive coordinators come and go, he's the offensive guy. Or Bill Belichick maintains the defense. So while defensive coordinators may come and go, Matt Patricia to the Lions, he maintains the offense. He maintains the defense. But the opposite side of the ball, both those sides have been pretty lucky. They had Josh McDaniels for a long time. The Kansas City Chiefs now have Steve Spagnuolo, who continues to be there, and he fits perfectly. Now, the Lions are in a tougher spot, right? They're losing both their coordinators, and we don't think of Dan Campbell as that guy, because I don't think he is that guy. But I also have a lot of confidence in how this process is going to play out. Number one, offensively, because Dan Campbell has made it clear, I'm the offensive guy. I have to have a large say in who we bring in an offensive coordinator. He said, like, I got to take that on myself to make sure that we get the right guy to make this thing happen. And Brad already told us he's not worried about losing Ben for Jared Goff. He said, as long as I'm here, as long as Dan's here, you know, the pieces that we put around him, he was good elsewhere before he got here, all of that stuff. But mainly, it's the fact that Dan Campbell's involvement, him taking that on his shoulders, gives me a lot of optimism, because we just point, I think, a lot of things to Ben Johnson. We see a trick play as Ben Johnson, but we don't think about all the people behind the scenes. We don't think about all the scouting department that goes into that, the lead up for the week, right? All the extra game planning. As Ben said, he's looking for an offense coordinator to help him set the table. So we don't know all of these things. We just naturally don't know who's doing what. But I also think when you think about Dan Campbell, let's not think about him as a guy that doesn't have his hand in any of this. Dan Campbell was the guy who took over play calling when he hired Anthony Lynn after bringing in a first-time defensive coordinator in Aaron Glenn. So this has been the setup before. Offensively got better, even though it was a bad roster, so I'm not like blaming anybody there. But also, even when you hear the little things of like Dan Campbell speaking on the 3rd and 1 and the pass that they made on 3rd and 1, oh, he shouldn't have thrown, he should have ran the ball, that kind of thing. I don't have an issue with it, but that's not the point. The point is that when you always hear Dan Campbell speaking on certain situations, he talks about how we like the look. Like he said on that play, we like the look that we had St. Brown on Bobby Wagner. It tells me the kind of involvement that Dan Campbell has. In those headsets, my assumption would be they're hearing every play call that's going down with Ben Johnson, because when I've had a headset on before, you hear the play calls, you hear the other coaches, depending on, you know, what side headset you have, but as a head coach, you're probably hearing everything. So my assumption is he's hearing the play calls from Ben Johnson, and that tells you how within the loop that he is. It doesn't mean he's going to be the play caller, but it tells you he's very in the loop. If you hear him talk about situations, he doesn't talk about it as like, oh, that was Ben's decision, you know, he kind of had this idea. It was like, hey, I give credit to Ben Johnson, but that was something that we like. Like, he understands the intricacies of what they're trying to do. So just keep that in mind with Dan Campbell. Like, Dan Campbell may not come off as like, I'm the guy that wants to play call. I don't think he wants to do that, but let's also not think about him as a very smart offensive mind, because all we have to know right now is that he's a pretty darn smart offensive mind, and he knows what he wants on both sides of the ball, and I think that's what matters at this point. Again, check out my wish list to hear more on that. Brad Holmes won Executive of the Year again from PFWA, second straight year. He now joins Bill Polian as the only executive to do that. I think this award, they said, started back in 1993. Well deserved from Brad Holmes. He constantly puts together an awesome team. I mean, there's nothing to really say about this one. Next one, big news. Hank Fraley is set to stay with the Lions as their offensive line coach, and he is getting a promotion, now being also named the Lions offensive run game coordinator. Now, that's not something that I believe we even had on the staff last season in terms of job title. However, the key to this is actually, to me, the fact that he was named that, right? Obviously, keeping around is huge. He had an offensive coordinator interview at one point. I would have been a little bit surprised if he would have gotten taken for that job, but I also wouldn't have had any issues with it, because I would have understood. This guy's been a terrific offensive line coach, to the point where our players are like, yeah, he's not leaving. All right, we're gonna throw out fake news on this guy to make sure that he can't leave. jokingly, of course, but that's how much they love this guy. Frank's like, I have not been here with anybody other than Hank Fraley. I'm not gonna play without Hank Fraley. Him being named run game coordinator means a lot. First off, when you talk about that offensive coordinator search, if that's an in-house option like Tanner Engstrand, or that's a Scotty Montgomery whose background is offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach at the collegiate level, if it's a guy like that who's worked more within the passing game, or if it's a guy again like Tanner Engstrand who literally was our pass game coordinator offensively this past season, I think that's really important because this offense, I thought, had a spot during last season towards like the 3/4 part of the season where the Lions had a little bit of a lull. Now that wasn't just on like play calling, but I thought there was a little bit of lack of diversity at one point in some of the run schemes that we were utilizing. Then by the time I finally questioned it a little bit, very next week and moving forward, it was as diverse as it had been all season long. And the Lions are capable of that. They have the personnel to do it. It's what makes them unique. As Brad said, that's our identity, right? We can play zone scheme. We can play gap scheme. We can play man. We can do all of these different things, and we can do it in different ways. We can go stretch zone plays. We can go inside zone. There's so much flexibility because of the skill set that we have on the offensive line and the football intelligence we have on the offensive line. So I think it being named run game coordinator actually means a lot because I hope that means that the Lions' diversity as a rushing attack will continue. It was actually on my wish list for a next coordinator before I even saw this news, so it all kind of ties together perfectly, that I think him becoming the run game coordinator could be very beneficial if it's an in-house option that becomes the next offensive coordinator. But even if it's out of house, having a guy like that involved heavily in the run game, it makes me think we're going to go in-house, but having a guy like that heavily involved in the run game and the game plan going into it, I think that he'll do a great job of really opening up the playbook in sense of, okay, what kind of run style do we want to lean into this week that attacks that defense, right? We don't want to just be we're an outside zone team, that's all we do, because then you run into a team that defends that well, and maybe you try to get out of it, and it's like, this is messy because we haven't done this all year. Lions are capable, and I actually think this is a really good step. I think this could potentially help our run game and make sure that we continue to have that flexibility. But also on top of that, the Lions offensive lineman, Christian Mahogany as a rookie, had a fantastic stretch. Yeah, he didn't play a lot, but his playoff game was really good. He gave up 3 pressures, run blocked his tail off in that game, and that was a really big challenge. Like, it wasn't like we threw it 10 times. There was pure drop back passing sets because of what the score and situation was, where he had to really hold up in pass sets, and he played a good game. Perfect? No, but a good game against highly paid interior defensive linemen that would kick inside their edge rushers on passing downs. That was a massive step in the right direction to potentially being the future either at right guard or left guard. Whether that's Kevin Zeitler does come back and he gets a new deal, his flexibility could allow him to compete with a guy Graham for the starting position. I don't see why not. I know he's under contract, but hey, the better man plays. He's already under contract. It is what it is. The better man plays. If that's Mahogany, we roll there. Or if Zeller doesn't get back, of course, then he could allow Mahogany to just step into the starting role opposite of Graham Glasgow. So Christian Mahogany, great start. I mean, this guy looked like the player in college, but honestly, even better. I still have questions about what that pass pro is going to look like in a larger sample size, but it's definitely been a great start because through the early season when we had to see him, it was a lot of run plays. It was a lot of situationally not calling for drop back passing and everybody could pin their ears back. It was less of that. It was very play action reliant, but he showed what his football intelligence was like, how smart he was as a player. He showed his flexibility as a run blocker. We talked about him early going into that game. Flexibility as a run blocker in his zone scheme, the success that he could add, the success on the play side. I think on the back side, you want to have some work there. His success getting up to the second level, his nastiness as a blocker, and then again, pass pro, like, small sample size, but it looked pretty solid against Washington. Then you move on to a guy like Giovanni Manu. Even though we didn't see him, he's trying to work on his left side, right side this offseason. Giovanni Manu got better throughout the preseason. I can really remember, like, from we first saw him and it looked really messy to by the time the last preseason game, he looked much better in pass protection. I still think that he has a lot of capabilities as a run blocker. There's just a lot of details that need to be ironed out. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we don't know about in terms of what Brad Holmes said. Like, if you saw him in OTAs versus seeing his practice film, looks like a completely different guy. And I tend to believe that because even just the preseason, in a 3-week span, he looked much better. He looked like a different player in the last preseason game. Taylor Decker had, I think, his best run blocking season I've seen. I thought he was visibly impactful. I thought he was impactful when he wasn't out there because you felt the loss of him. He was more of a people mover this season. And I got to give Taylor Decker a lot of credit for that. This is his best run blocking season, and his pressure rate or pressure efficiency allowed, according to PFF, was essentially the exact same as last year. So a really strong year again from Taylor Decker. Penei Sewell is Penei Sewell. He's fantastic. He's a freak. Frank Ragnow also had a really good season. I thought as a run blocker again, he was elite. He had games where he just dominated. Even recently against Washington, like he would just dominate reps, move guys off the ball. I mean, there were multiple occasions where he was part of just creating an absolute wall, and he kind of started everything there. And that's the Frank Ragnow that I think of. Is the best center in football is looking like that guy. Buffalo was really rough. He gave up 5 pressures against Buffalo, which really just turned into a pass fest. I was out there for 66 pass blocking snaps versus 13 run blocking snaps. Okay, that's a really big problem, so that lead into a plus. It's not a bad defensive line over there at Buffalo, especially on the interior. Indiana was a little bit of a problem as well, Indianapolis, and again, a lot of that is they have some dogs in the interior, specifically when you think about guys like Grover Stewart on the inside there. He allowed 4 pressures, and then early in the season, Tampa Bay was kind of a mess against Vita Vea. Our whole offense was a mess at that time, in fairness, but it was kind of a mess in pass protection. Vita Vea is one of the best in football. To me, he got to the point where he looked like an elite run blocker once again. That's what he looked like to me this season. And then a guy like Dan Skipper. I mean, Dan Skipper's growth is very noticeable. The guy played over 300 snaps, and he looked incredibly reliable this past season. We called upon him to be a starter. Now, Houston may be the worst performance that he had, but I mean, let's be honest, it's Houston. He gave up 3 pressures in that game. It's one of the best pass rushing fronts in football, even with injury. I thought he played well versus Chicago, where I walked away from Chicago like, okay, I feel pretty comfortable with this guy. The home game at Chicago, I walked away thinking like, I went too far with the future idea. He's 30 years old. But as the idea of like, okay, he could be your backup tackle and you feel comfortable with him, I walked away from Chicago thinking, yeah, I'd be comfortable with that guy going forward. Same thing with Green Bay. Had another good performance. High draft picks at defensive end. Maybe didn't pan out in a 4-man rush then so far this past season. But he did a good job. And then as a run blocker, I think is where we kind of felt the let off a little bit more than anything. You felt the miss of Taylor Decker, which is a credit to Decker because he was that good of a run blocker this year. But then also because Dan Skipper, I think he just struggles a little bit to get under pads consistently. Kind of limits him in terms of his ability to latch, sustain, create drive. It's a little bit of an issue there for Skipper. Of course, we always use him as our jumbo package offensive lineman, and he's very valuable in that sense. I mean, he can catch passes this season, as we saw. The dude's an absolute menace. Like, that's the kind of piece you want on your offensive line. Even going back to last year, I remember showing clips coming into the year, like, this is the guy that I want. This guy's, like, chasing defenders after the play. He's prying dudes off of Jared Goff. I mean, when he was lined up at receiver last year, he was, like, trying to get open. I love Dan Skipper as a player. I absolutely love this dude. But this year was a huge step. Pass pro, he looked very adequate in pass protection. Again, it wasn't like elite play, but he has a style. He plays into his style well. He gets contact early. He latches early, and he finds some success with some real torso flexion. I love me some Dan Skipper, and I think he's taken steps to where it was questionable. Like, are we sure that he can be the backup tackle? I think he answered those questions this past season. We have a fantastic offensive line coach, and I'm glad that Hank Fraley is sticking around. Chris Spielman is also set to stick around, as he is set to not get the job with the Jets as their general manager. They're going to go with the assistant GM from the Denver Broncos in Darren. Can't really say the dude's last name, but Chris Spielman's going to stick around. He's listed as a special assistant for the Lions. I don't know exactly what his job title would be. I think it could be difficult for him to land a general manager position, unless, of course, you're landing him and then asking him to really help within that process of hiring the next head coach. I think they hire head coach and then hire Chris Spielman. I'd be a little bit surprised if a team did that at some point, because he doesn't really have like that typical scouting background, which I think a lot of teams are really leaning into right now. You don't need to have that, but a lot of teams are kind of leaning into that. However, Chris Spielman is a Lion, and him as a Lion might be him at his best. I mean, he helped bring in Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. Like, he feels like the kind of filter that you just want things to go through. Like, you have any questions, maybe run it by Chris Spielman. Things will probably get right after running it by him. And then finally, I wanted to bring up Za'Darius Smith, because Za'Darius Smith made the post on Instagram talking about this past season, but he essentially said it straight up. Like, I would like to be back this next season. 2024 didn't go as planned at all. We fell short of the outcome we had planned for. 2025 gives us another opportunity to adjust and go for the championship. I enjoyed every moment with my boys, and even though some faces have changed for the new season, we see the coaching staff now and some players, I hope to be a part of this great organization for the future. Look, man, I thought when we traded for Za'Darius Smith, one of the biggest benefits was his contract. The guy currently right now, according to Spotrac, is just over $4 million. Over the cap is $5.7 million for 2025. I thought that was one of the best benefits, is that you could have him locked in beyond just one season, and I think that's a fantastic opportunity with Aiden Hutchinson. Doesn't mean don't draft anybody or don't look for more help, because I think you definitely could and probably should, but Za'Darius Smith being brought back opposite of Hutchinson, that's what I want to see play out. That's where I think Za'Darius Smith is at his best. He had to come in this season and be the guy, He picked up 40 pressures. Wasn't an elite run defender by any means. He was definitely adequate in that spot. There was really good awareness for him for the most part. He just wasn't, a guy that was constantly working over blocks or an enforcer against a run at the point of attack. Guys could attack him a little bit, but his pass rusher, he was good. He was an above average. He was good, really a really good pass rusher, good to great type of pass rusher that again brought production to the team, brought the inside flexibility as we looked for when we added him, and I thought that he fit perfect. That was the guy that I was after as a Lions fan when it became like, hey, Lions need to go get a pass rusher. We landed it. I was fired up, and I'm fired up to see him with Aiden Hutchinson. I would love to have Za'Darius back, and I'm glad that he put this post out that he also would love to be back within this organization, because I truly think that if you have Za'Darius back next season, regardless of who you add, if he was a starter opposite of Hutchinson, again, I think we'd be coming into next year saying the Lions have the case for one of the best defensive lines in football, hands down. They were ranked number 4 coming in this year. They had one of the best defensive line, unfortunately, till injuries kind of just derailed everything on the front, but that healthy unit, to me, has the case for best defensive line in football without adding anybody else. Yes, I want depth, but I would love to have Za'Darius Smith back. I'm a big Za'Darius fan, and I also think, again, it added the value to the trade of the fact that we can have him beyond just one season. This doesn't have to just be a rental, and as of now, I think Za'Darius Smith is going to be back, but we'll see how that plays out. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I appreciate y'all joining, man. Have a great weekend, and I will see you again soon. If you haven't seen my last video, I talk about a couple coordinator candidates. If you're looking for more content, head over to Bleacher Report. I'm live Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time each week. Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Today, I talked about coordinator wish list. Wednesday, I talked about coaching candidates for the defensive side. So if you want more content, check it out over there. But until then, I'll see you. Thank you, for watching, and I'm out.